that mobile games market is heavily shaped by tech giants like Apple, which control the digital storefronts those mobile games rely on.
This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. I bet a lot of y'all watching the show are also doing a bit of second screening, meaning watching the show while also checking out something on your phone. Now, I ain't calling y'all out. It's a pretty common thing these days, and if I wasn't actively doing the show, I would probably have my iPhone out too. It's one of several I've bought after going into an Apple store and being told that my phone is several generations behind, and that's why it's not working. The Apple brand is pretty ubiquitous, and that's prompted questions about whether the company's everywhereness and how it plays a few different sides of the same market stifles competition. So tonight, we're talking about Apple and the big, scary M word, monopoly. What'd you think I was gonna say? The question here, does Apple have an unfair stranglehold on an online marketplace? To answer that question, we're gonna work through three other big questions, starting with this. For one, what is a monopoly exactly? If you hear the word monopoly and the first thing that comes to mind is the game that asks you to ruthlessly build a real estate empire as a dog or a thimble, you're not alone. Defining monopolies can be a tricky game of its own, but the most relevant definition here is just this: exclusive control of trade in a service. It's like if you wanted to go from Baltic Avenue to Boardwalk and I had exclusive control of every possible space you could land on, thereby forcing you to fork over that cold, hard, fake cash to me and only me. No other options on the market. That's a monopoly. That's also the part of the game where it's totally acceptable to just flip the board over and storm out. Why were you even playing in the first place? So a follow-up question. Does Apple have a monopoly? Let's start by asking Mr. Tim Apple, aka Tim Cook, himself.
I don't think anybody reasonable is going to come to the conclusion that Apple's a monopoly.
Guess that settles it then. Let's just pack things up here. Show's over. Wait, but why? Just for those unreasonable people, why is Apple definitely not a monopoly?
Some people would argue if you are selling a good, then you can't have a product that competes with that good. But that's an argument, Nora, that takes you down the path that Walmart shouldn't be stocking a alternative or house brand.
So that's a super interesting comparison Tim Cook is making there. Why shouldn't Apple be able to stick its Cocoa Crunch corn cereal maps next to Google's Cocoa Puffs maps? We all know it ain't true capitalism until I can buy 7 different store brands of Cocoa Sugar Ball cereal off the store shelves. I'm an adult with dispensable income, so don't think I won't. But that store brand comparison from Cook is a bit of a twist on what Apple's critics are actually arguing. There are plenty of people and other companies arguing that Apple does indeed have a monopoly, especially in how it handles its App Store. In many cases, when you enter Apple's store, it's a bit like Apple is quietly dropping its own product into your shopping cart while it's putting a competitor app on the bottom shelf or just pulling it off the shelves altogether. So all that leads us to one last question here. What can anybody even do about this? Well, if you've got a bit of political power, you've got options, either through new regulations or just putting folks in the hot seat. And cracking down on big tech has definitely become a sort of bipartisan bridge.
It's like in baseball. You can be the umpire or you can own one of the teams, but you don't get to be the umpire and own the team.
I just want to focus on one major source of that income. It's not innovation. It's not research and development. It's the monopoly rents that you collect out of your app store.
But even with lawmakers looking over their shoulder, Apple's more immediate challenge comes from its competitors taking the company to court. For Newsy's Next Level series, our good pal Matt Picht looked at how one competitor's case against Apple and its App Store opened up a wider debate over mobile games and might have even bolstered Apple's own arguments.
Candy Crush? Clash of Clans? Roblox? These games might not look like much, but they're a huge part of the $90 billion video game industry. The rise of mobile gaming has reshaped the economics of the broader gaming world while creating a flourishing market of its own. But that mobile games market is heavily shaped by tech giants like Apple, which control the digital storefronts those mobile games rely on.
We call it Apple Arcade. With a single subscription, you'll get access to over 100 new and exclusive games that will raise the bar for what's possible in gaming.
A recent court challenge to Apple's influence over those markets reveals just how important gaming is to mobile platforms, and how those games are still at the mercy of big tech. Mobile gaming is ubiquitous these days. Smartphones are the most common gaming platform in US households. The largest games have raked in billions of dollars in revenue using a free-to-play economic model. Let players enjoy the base game for free, and then sell them small gameplay boosts later on. Free-to-play mechanics can be frustrating for players to engage with, but they've proven lucrative enough to spread to other gaming platforms, like Epic Games' massively successful multiplayer shooter, Fortnite, which made $9 billion in its first 2 years. It's also made gaming into a financial powerhouse on the App Store. About 62% of App Store revenue in 2018 came from gaming apps.
Yeah, I think games have always just been monetized better, and maybe there's just more of a case for more games to monetize through in-app purchases. So games have always been kind of the biggest driver of revenue on the App Store.
Craig Chappell is a games analyst for Sensor Tower, a business which tracks the ups and downs of the mobile app market.
I believe last year, App Store and Google Play combined generated $79.7 billion worldwide.
And that money means big bucks for the storefronts as well. In exchange for hooking developers up with paying customers, Apple and Google both take about 30% of all digital transactions that are made using their stores. That's been an industry standard rate for over a decade, but has faced more and more scrutiny as the digital economy has grown.
They do, to some extent, provide an audience. Whether that 30% cut is sustainable, it looks like the courts are going to decide, or US Congress or the European Commission will be taking a look at that.
Epic, the Fortnite company, runs its own digital game store with a 12% fee. The company took Apple to court by claiming the App Store is a monopoly, icing out competitors and forcing developers to use Apple's storefront and pay its 30% cut. The ensuing legal battle focused largely on how Apple runs its App Store, and the trial made one thing clear. Apple treats games differently from other apps, particularly when it comes to how they're distributed. Popular subscription services like Netflix and Spotify allow users access to a bunch of different media for a monthly fee. Apple has a similar service for games called Apple Arcade, but it hasn't let other game streaming services onto the App Store. This has kept mobile publishers from experimenting with new services like Microsoft Game Pass or Google Stadia. These one-stop subscriptions can help subsidize smaller games that don't monetize as aggressively. But apart from its own arcade selections, Apple doesn't seem to want those services on its store. There's clearly something about games that singles them out from other media in this regard. It hit the point where popular mobile gaming platform Roblox shifted to calling itself an experience rather than a game during the trial, seemingly to avoid being lumped in with disallowed services like Stadia. Limiting other sources of games turns the App Store into a bit of a bottleneck for games hoping to get on iOS devices. This lets Apple weed out any content the company deems controversial, tilting the platform's game selection away from serious subjects and towards more casual games. Apple argues it's free to make its own decisions about how its App Store works, and most of its decisions are about improving customer experience. If Apple gives up that control, it could open users up to the risk of security threats from invasive apps.
That would destroy the security of the iPhone and a lot of the privacy initiatives that we built into the App Store.
Still, the antitrust pressure has already had some effect. Apple and Google have both slashed their storefront rate from 30 to 15% for developers making under $1 million. If more scrutiny leads to more changes, we could see a broader swath of games flooding the mobile market, and a rare defeat for the tech giants that control those platforms.
Joining us now is Matt Picht, friend of ITL and award-winning journalist. Matt, are you ready to play a game of Explain This with us?
As I'll ever be, let's go.
Here is the first image. Can you explain this?
So this is a screenshot from a mobile game called High Heels, which has been kind of a recent phenomenon on the mobile game markets. It kind of blew up on TikTok back in March. It kind of serves, I think, as a pretty good indicator of what developing for mobile is actually like. So the game itself, free to download, you get all their money from in-game ads and then also from selling
microtransactions, the sort of in-app purchases that we've been talking about, including the ability to play without watching ads. And this is one of the most popular games on iOS recently. Blew up top of the charts multiple months in a row. And then Sensor Tower tracked about 2 million iOS downloads that High Heels got back in the month of April. On those downloads, the game made an estimated $40,000 in revenue, which is about 2 cents per download. So that should give you some idea of the scope and scale we're dealing with when it comes to mobile game economies. It's about thin margins and wide nets. So even the smallest changes from Apple or whoever's running the platform can have really big consequences.
I was gonna say, I haven't seen High Heels in the App Store, but maybe I should be on the lookout for it. Matt, if you don't mind, here is the second image. Can you explain this?
Right. So this is an old logo for a company called Valve, which used to be known for making really big, really good PC games. But these days, they're mostly known as the company that runs the Steam store, which is the biggest PC digital marketplace for video games. Now, this has come up in the Apple versus Epic trial because, like Apple, Valve actually takes a 30% cut of the profits it makes on Steam as well. So Apple's kind of pointed to this and say, hey, look, we're not the only ones doing this. This is an industry standard. Now, the 30% rate has kind of been set by Apple back in 2008 when it was selling songs on iTunes. And every other sort of digital marketplace has just kind of picked that up as basically the going rate for digital transactions and digital sales. But these days, there's a lot more money floating around than there was back in 2008, and a lot more dissension from developers that this kind of revenue share is actually worth it. Steam has faced a lot of competition for its rates, including from Epic as well. Epic has gone after Steam and Apple both. Their own Epic Game Store has offered a 12% rate for developers in an attempt to kind of pressure Steam to lower their prices. So these digital storefronts are now facing a lot more pressure, and I think it's not just Apple that's going to be feeling this pinch. Everyone who's trying to sell games, sell digital products online is going to be facing some amount of pressure from developers as well.
Man, just a wealth of knowledge. All right, let's do this last image. Matt, I'm hoping this last one is just a bit less obscure than the other two.
Yeah.
Here's the third image. Matt, what's going on here?
All right, so you know who this is. This is Senator Amy Klobuchar, former presidential candidate.
Her.
Yeah, you're familiar. So when she hasn't running for president, she's now chairing the Senate Judiciary Committee's antitrust subcommittee. So the little group in the Senate Judiciary Committee that's going after big monopolies and stuff. And big tech has been one of her main sort of targets in her tenure. Back in April, she led a big hearing into some antitrust concerns that touched on a lot of the stuff that came up in the Apple versus Epic trial. Google and Apple were both on the hot seat there, and they had to answer some big questions about stuff like their commission rates on the stores, blocking app downloads outside of the stores, and de-emphasizing competitive apps that were competing with stuff that Apple and Google were trying to do internally. So it's not just this one trial. What happens in Apple versus Epic will be very important, but it's not the end of the road for either of these companies. There's more and more political pressure in the US and elsewhere to clamp down on the sort of big tech control over these app stores. And Apple and Google are going to have to be fighting this battle for a long time, no matter what happens in the Apple versus Epic trial.
Award-winning journalist Matt Picht, thank you so much for providing context. Hopefully you'll come back and do this again, man.
Absolutely, looking forward to it. Thanks, CB.
So Apple is a major player in the online marketplace for apps, games, a lot of things. But big picture, it's just one major player among a group of corporations that collectively you might call big tech. Right now, 10 of the largest tech firms have a combined market worth of more than $10 trillion. If you thought of them as a single nation in gross domestic product terms, that would rank them as the world's third largest economy, according to the New York Times. Stateside and abroad, governments are trying to limit the so-called monopoly power of these companies. So how exactly do you crack down on big tech? It's a question countries around the world are still trying to answer, and the approaches are very different. In Australia, the parliament passed a law this year forcing big tech companies to pay for news. In a show of pushing back, Facebook temporarily shut down news sharing in the country, and Google threatened to pull out of Australia completely.
The social media platforms benefit considerably from having news content posted on their sites, and they ought to pay for it, which under most circumstances they have not been doing.
In Russia, there were swift steps to try and control online speech. The country's internet regulator was pushing Silicon Valley to delete posts it found to be illegal. We saw a little bit of that in the US during the latest presidential election and the pandemic. Social media sites took down certain posts for containing falsehoods, but those moves also opened a whole other can of worms about freedom of speech and the power certain social media platforms had over it by doing that. Since then, lawmakers have tried to find other approaches to crack down on big tech and catch up with the rest of the world. Just last month, the House of Representatives Antitrust Subcommittee introduced 5 bills aimed at regulating monopolies in the technology industry. It comes after a report from the subcommittee found that at least 50% of e-commerce sales go through Amazon, 99% of mobile devices run on Apple iOS or Google's Android systems, Facebook's app reached 74% of mobile users, and Google captured 89% of all search queries. The bills all try to target the overreach of big tech. One would give more power to the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department to break up tech firms by forcing them to sell off parts of their businesses, like Amazon's branch of house brands named Amazon Basics. A professor we spoke to calls this the octopus effect.
All these different tentacles these companies have, all these related products, and they have the ability to be in all these different markets at the same time, some of which creates, as the bill refers to it as conflicts of interest.
Another bill would stop companies from giving their own services preference over their rivals, like Google boosting its own products in search results, or what Apple has long been accused of doing in its App Store. But here's the thing, establishing the regulations is only the first step. Enforcing them is something else entirely. When you're back, we'll tell you how really smart people are using plastics to change how we fly.